At 2:47 a.m. Tehran time, the city went dark, not from bombs, not from missiles, from code. 17 seconds later, Iran's Eskarg Island oil terminal, the artery that pumps 90% of Iran's crude exports into the world, went offline. SCADA systems fried, pressure valves locked, pipelines hemorrhaging in controlled, deliberate silence. No explosion, no crater, no declaration of war, just ... nothing. And that nothing said everything. In the game of global power, there are no accidents, only messages. And tonight, America sent a message written in the language that the 21st century actually understands, not gunpowder, algorithm. What you are about to see is not a war story. It is an autopsy of desperation. The autopsy of a superpower that looked at the global chessboard and decided it was time to flip the table. Forget Tomahawk missiles. Forget aircraft carriers on the horizon. What hit Iran in the early hours of 2026 was something the world had never seen deployed at this scale. Call it Stuxnet 2.0, but Stuxnet was a scalpel. This was a nervous system shutdown. U.S. Cyber Command, reportedly operating in conjunction with NSA's Tailored Access Operations Unit, deployed a layered attack. First, a deep infiltration malware, years in dormancy inside Iranian industrial control systems, suddenly activated. Simultaneously, AI-coordinated drone swarms, not piloted, not remotely controlled in the traditional sense, autonomous, hundreds of low-signature micro-drones, each running real-time threat assessment, surgical in their targeting, radar installations, fuel-loading platforms, the fiber optic backbone of Iran's oil export communications. Destroyed, methodically, almost quietly. This wasn't shock and awe. This was what military planners now call surgical deconstruction, the precise dismantling of an adversary's economic weapon while leaving their cities breathing. Because the goal was never Tehran, the goal was always Hormuz, 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. That's all that stands between the global economy and absolute paralysis, the Strait of Hormuz. Every single day, roughly 21 million barrels of oil pass through this waterway. That is 20% of the world's entire petroleum supply, Saudi crude, Emirati crude, Kuwaiti crude, Qatari LNG, all of it bottlenecked through a corridor Iran can see from its southern coastline. Iran doesn't need a nuclear weapon to hold the world hostage. It just needs to close that strait. But here is what the mainstream coverage is missing entirely. The strike wasn't triggered by a military threat. It was triggered by a financial one. Our sources indicate that Iran was within weeks of finalizing a landmark agreement, one that would commit 100% of its oil export settlements to the Chinese yuan, not a partial deal, not a pilot program, everything, permanently, irrevocably. Think about what that means. Iran sits on the world's second-largest natural gas reserves and fourth-largest oil reserves. Full yuan settlement would have created a critical mass, a proof of concept for every BRICS nation watching that you can sell energy without the dollar, that the petrodollar, the 50-year-old architecture that underwrites American global dominance, is not inevitable. It is optional. And once the world decides the dollar is optional, the American century doesn't fade. It collapses. Washington didn't strike Iran's oil terminals to punish Iran. It struck them to burn the contract before it could be signed. So where was China? Iran operates some of the most sophisticated Chinese-supplied electronic warfare systems on the planet, part of the 25-year, $400 billion Sino-Iranian Cooperation Pact. HQ to 9 air defense networks. Chinese radar jamming architecture. It failed, completely, and there are two explanations, both disturbing. Explanation 1. The USAI swarm flew below, around, and threw Chinese U systems in ways that exposed fundamental gaps in China's defensive technology. Beijing is right now studying every second of that attack, every telemetry signature, every evasion pattern. Taking notes. Explanation 2, far darker. China let it happen, because China is not fighting this war with weapons. China is fighting it with patience. Let America reveal its most advanced autonomous warfare capabilities. Let America absorb the geopolitical blowback. Let oil spike. And then, when the dust settles, Beijing steps in as the reasonable partner, the rebuilder, the financier. China may have just used Iran as a live laboratory to map the full spectrum of American military capability. In geopolitics, sometimes your ally's tragedy is your intelligence goldmine. The markets didn't wait for confirmation. Within 90 minutes of the first reports, Brent crude hit $147 a barrel. By morning, it crossed $150, the highest price in recorded history. The war risk premium, that invisible tax that shipping insurers slap on every vessel moving through threatened waters, quadrupled overnight. Container shipping through the Gulf effectively paused. Tanker captains waiting for orders that weren't coming. On Wall Street, the Dow opened down 1,400 points. The VIX Fear Index, market's internal panic alarm, screamed to levels not seen since the 2020 COVID crash. Airline stocks incinerated. Petrochemical stocks split, some surging, some collapsing. Defense contractors, predictably, hit record highs before the opening bell even rang. And in Moscow, Riyadh, and Caracas, oil ministers were doing very quiet math. Because when Hormuz trembles, everyone with oil in the ground gets richer. Chaos in this industry has a very specific set of winners. Here is the cold, uncomfortable truth. America didn't strike Iran to start a war. It struck to stop the world from ending the American century. The Petrodollar, the SWIFT network, the IMF architecture. These are not just financial systems. They are the skeleton of American power, and Iran, backed by China, backed by BRICS+, was about to pull a critical bone. The strike may have bought time. Months, perhaps a year, but oil markets have memory. China has patience. And BRICS+ has been building yuan-denominated settlement infrastructure with quiet, deliberate purpose for over a decade. You cannot bomb an idea. You cannot drone strike a trend line. The real question, the one Washington's war rooms are wrestling with at this very hour, is whether tonight's strike was a decisive intervention ... or whether America just lit the fuse on something that moves far slower than any missile and burns far hotter than any fire. The strait is still open, for now, but the world is watching who controls it and increasingly ... It isn't asking America for permission.